There are stories in history that sound too crazy to be true. Stories where a single moment of anger, a single act of betrayal, changes the entire world. I have a story like that for you tonight. I am actually super excited to share this because without this specific chain of disasters, the device sitting under your TV right now simply wouldn't exist. Our story begins in the 1970s in Japan, but I want you to picture the atmosphere first. Forget the Japan of today with anime billboards and maid cafes everywhere. Imagine a post-war industrial powerhouse. Factories are smoking, trains are running on time, and technology is booming. And at the center of this boom, there is one company that shines brighter than the rest: Sony. Now, back then, Sony wasn't a gaming company. In fact, if you mentioned video games inside Sony's headquarters, they would probably laugh at you and show you the door. Sony was the cool kid. They made high-end radios. They made the Walkman. They were for serious people who liked serious electronics. Young engineers in Japan didn't dream of being YouTubers. They dreamed of wearing that Sony uniform. And one of those dreamers was a young man named Ken Kutaragi. You have to understand Ken, this guy wasn't just smart. He was the kind of kid who got straight A's in every class without even trying. He was obsessed with machines. While other kids were playing baseball, Ken was taking apart radios, looking at the green circuit boards, trying to understand the soul of the machine. He wanted to understand the logic behind the magic. But life has a funny way of testing you. Just as Ken was about to enter university to study electronics, tragedy struck. His father was diagnosed with severe cancer. Visualize this: a small, dusty printing shop in Tokyo, the smell of ink and paper in the air. His father is bedridden, the business is failing. Ken, a young student, looks at this situation and thinks, I have to quit school. I have to save the family business. It's a heavy moment. He goes to his father's bedside and says, Dad, I'm quitting. I'll run the shop. But his father? He was an old-school legend. Even in his sickness, he looked at Ken and refused. He said, you have a brain. You are not going to rot in this shop like me. Sell the shop. Sell everything. Go chase your dream. But I have one condition. Whatever you do, be the absolute best at it. Ken was shocked. That was the last push he needed. He promised himself he would honor that wish. He applied to Sony, survived the brutal selection process, and got in. He was finally a Sony engineer. Fast forward a few years, it's 1983. Ken is now a father himself. One day, he's walking through an electronics store, maybe looking for a new calculator or something boring. And he sees his daughter staring at a screen. It's a Nintendo Famicom. It's plastic, it's cheap, it looks like a toy. Ken buys it, takes it home, and sets it up. He watches his daughter ignore the expensive computer he bought her and spend hours playing on this cheap Nintendo. And that's when the gears in Ken's head started turning. He looked at that gray box and thought, this is it. This isn't just a toy. This is a computer for the living room. But there was one thing Ken hated about it: the sound. To Ken's audiophile ears, the Nintendo sounded terrible. Beeps and boops. It was painful. He thought, I can fix this. Sony can fix this. But here's the problem. Sony hated games. I mean, they absolutely hated them. The executives thought video games were a passing fad. So what did Ken do? He went rogue. He started working on a secret project. He contacted Nintendo behind his boss's back. He said, hey, your sound chip is garbage. Let me build you a new one using Sony technology. Nintendo, who loves saving money, said, sure. Ken worked in secret, hiding his designs from his own managers. It was like a spy movie inside a corporate office. But eventually, the Sony executives found out. They were furious. They dragged Ken into a meeting room. The atmosphere was tense. Why are you wasting Sony's time on a child's toy? They screamed. You are working for a competitor. They were ready to fire him. But then the door opened, and in walked the CEO of Sony, Norio Okaga. Let me tell you about Norio. He wasn't your typical corporate suit. Before he was a CEO, he was an opera singer. Yes, really. A professional baritone singer. Because of his musical background, he was obsessed with sound quality. He looked at the angry executives. Then he looked at Ken. Ken explained the project. It's about the sound, sir. It's about bringing digital quality sound to millions of homes. Norio's eyes lit up. He turned to the angry board of directors and dropped a line that saved history. Stop it. Leave the kid alone. Let him do it. With the CEO's protection, Ken finished the chip. It was a success. Nintendo loved it. This opened the door for a bigger conversation. Sony said, "Hey Nintendo, let's build a console together." The Nintendo PlayStation. It seemed perfect. The two biggest Japanese giants working together. They shook hands. They signed contracts. Ken was on cloud nine. His dream was coming true. Then came the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, 1991. This was supposed to be Sony's big moment. Sony executives went on stage. They announced the partnership. They told the world, "We are building the future with Nintendo." The press loved it. But Nintendo had a secret. The CEO of Nintendo at the time was paranoid. He thought, if this succeeds, Sony will own the gaming industry, not us. So Nintendo made a cold-blooded decision. The very next day at CES 9 a.m., Nintendo holds a press conference. Everyone expects them to talk about Sony. Instead, the Nintendo executive walks up to the mic and says, "We are pleased to announce that we are partnering with Philips." Philips, Sony's biggest rival! The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. It wasn't just a business change, it was a public execution. It was the ultimate stab in the back. Back at Sony, it was a funeral atmosphere. The executives wanted to shut everything down. "Pack it up, Ken. Go back to making radios." Ken was devastated. But remember his father's words. He requested one final meeting with the CEO, Norio Oga. The entire board was against Ken. Ken looked at Norio and played to his pride. He said, "Are we really going to let Nintendo do this to us? Are we going to let them laugh at Sony? Or are we going to build our own machine and destroy them?" Norio Oga sat there silent. He was an artist, remember? He had an ego. He slammed his fist on the table. He looked at Ken and shouted, "Do IT, go build it. And make sure it wins." And just like that, the PlayStation project was reborn. But this time, it was personal. But having the permission was one thing. Building it was another. Sony had 0 game developers. 0. Ken had to go door to door, begging game companies to make games for Sony. He went to Namco. "Please make games for us." Namco said, "Who are you? You make TVs. Buy 3 million units from us first, then we talk." Everyone slammed the door in his face. Ken knew he needed to show them something they couldn't ignore. He needed a wow moment. He spent months building a graphics engine that could do something Nintendo couldn't, real-time 3D. It is 1993, a gloomy presentation room in Tokyo. 60 game developers are sitting there, bored. They expect another boring presentation. Ken walks in. He pulls a cloth off a TV. On the screen, there is a dinosaur, a T-Rex. Ken picks up the controller. He moves the stick. The T-Rex turns its head. It opens its mouth. The camera pans around it. It was 3D. It was fast. It was smooth. The developers gasped. They had never seen anything like it on a home console. Before this, games were flat. Mario was flat. Sonic was flat. This was the future. The room erupted in applause. Developers who had laughed at Sony were now begging to sign contracts. Namco came back and said, "Where do we sign?" But tech wasn't enough. Ken had one more weapon to kill Nintendo, and it was all about logistics. This part is boring on paper, but in reality, it's what won the war. Nintendo used cartridges. If you were a game developer making a game for Nintendo, you had to order cartridges from them. It took 3 months to manufacture and ship. Imagine you make a game. It becomes a hit. You sell out in a week. You call Nintendo, "I need more." Nintendo says, "Okay, see you in 3 months." By the time the new cartridges arrive, the kids have forgotten about your game. You go bankrupt. It was a nightmare. Sony used CDs. Do you know how long it takes to print a CD? 3 days. And the cost? A cartridge cost $30 to make. A CD cost $1. Ken went to the developers and said, "Look, you can make more money, and you can get your games in 3 days. Why stay with Nintendo?" It was a no-brainer. Developers flocked to Sony not just because the graphics were cool, but because Sony treated them like partners, while Nintendo treated them like servants. December 3rd, 1994, the launch day of the original PlayStation. Ken Kutaragi was nervous. He was sitting in his office, waiting for the phone to ring. Had they failed? Was Nintendo too strong? Then the calls started coming in. Sold out in Akihabara, sold out in Shinjuku. The lines are wrapping around the block. It was a phenomenon. The PlayStation didn't just sell, it dominated. It made gaming cool for adults It wasn't just for kids anymore, it was for everyone. And poor Nintendo. They stuck with cartridges for their next console, the N64. And they lost. They lost the crown they had held for a decade. All because they were arrogant. All because they tried to stab Sony in the back. In the end, that betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to Sony. It woke a sleeping giant. Ken Kutaragi went from being the weird engineer in the corner to the CEO of Sony Computer Entertainment. He became a legend. And it all started because a father told his son to be the best, and because a company refused to be humiliated. So next time you pick up a DualShock controller, remember, you are holding a piece of revenge history. All right, let's keep the energy going. The last story was about a quiet engineer getting revenge on a giant company. This next story, it is even more aggressive. It is about two massive egos, fast cars, and arguably the most expensive insult in history. If you like cars, you know these names. But even if you don't drive, you are going to love the pettiness of this rivalry. I want to take you to Italy, the late 1950s. Imagine the rolling hills of Tuscany, the smell of espresso, the sound of expensive engines roaring down the highway. In this world, there was one king, Enzo Ferrari. The man was a legend. He built the fastest, most beautiful cars on earth. Driving a Ferrari wasn't just about transportation. It was a status symbol. It meant you had made it. But Enzo Ferrari, let's just say he wasn't the easiest guy to be friends with. He was arrogant, he was stubborn. He treated his customers not like kings, but like lucky peasants who were allowed to buy his art. He believed that if the car broke down, it was probably your fault because you didn't know how to drive it. Enter our challenger, Ferruccio Lamborghini. Now, today, when you hear Lamborghini, you think of rappers, supercars, and distinct yellow designs. But back then, Ferruccio was a tractor guy. Literally, he made farm equipment. He was a mechanic who came from a farming family, and after World War II, he became super rich by building the best tractors in Italy. Ferruccio was a wealthy man. And like any wealthy Italian man in the 50s, he loved fast cars. He owned Jaguars, Mercedes, Maseratis. And of course, he bought himself a Ferrari 250 GT, a masterpiece of design. He loved the way it looked, but he hated the way it drove. You see, Ferruccio was a mechanic at heart. He knew engines, and he noticed that the clutch on his expensive Ferrari kept breaking. It was too weak for the engine. Every time he drove it hard, the clutch would burn out. He had to keep taking it back to the factory to get it fixed. And he was tired of it. So one day, Ferruccio decides to fix it himself. He asks his mechanics to take apart the Ferrari. They drop the transmission. They open it up. And what do they find? Ferruccio looks at the clutch plate and realizes something shocking. It was the exact same commercial clutch that he used in his tractors. He was furious. He thought, I paid a fortune for this sports car, and Enzo is using a cheap tractor part inside it? He felt cheated. He felt disrespected. So, being the confident man he was, he decided to go straight to the source. He drove to the Ferrari factory in Maranello to complain to the boss himself. Now imagine this scene. Ferruccio Lamborghini, a stocky, rough-handed tractor manufacturer, walking into the office of Enzo Ferrari, the elegant, sophisticated king of racing. Ferruccio looks Enzo in the eye and says, Enzo, your cars are rubbish. The clutch is weak. I keep burning it out. You need to build them better. This was a critical moment. Enzo Ferrari had a choice. He could have said, thank you for the feedback, sir. We will look into it. If he had said that, history would be very different. But remember, Enzo had an ego the size of Italy. He looked at this tractor maker with disgust. He sneered and said the words that would change automotive history forever. He said, Lamborghini, you may be able to drive a tractor, but you will never be able to handle a Ferrari properly. The problem is not with the car. The problem is the driver. Go back to your farm. Ouch, it was the ultimate insult. He basically told him, you are a peasant. Stick to your plows. Leave the fast cars to the big boys. Ferruccio stood there. His face probably turned red. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just turned around, walked out of the office, and got back into his car. But as he drove home, a fire was burning inside him. He thought, okay, Enzo, You think I'm just a tractor guy? Fine, I will show you. I will build a car that is faster than yours, more reliable than yours, and more luxurious than yours. And I will do it just to spite you. Ferruccio got to work immediately. He didn't just want to build a car, he wanted to build a Ferrari killer. He built a new factory just down the road from Ferrari's home, which is a massive power move. He hired Ferrari's own ex-engineers. He paid them double what Enzo was paying. He told them, I want a V12 engine, but I want it smoother, I want it better. He took the clutch from his tractor, the one he knew was strong, and designed a sports car around it. He worked day and night. People told him he was crazy. They said, you can't compete with Ferrari. Ferrari is a religion. You are just a fad. But Ferruccio was fueled by pure 100% revenge. In 1963, just a year after the argument, the Turin Motor Show happened. The world was waiting to see what the tractor man had built. The curtain dropped. There it was, the Lamborghini 350 GTV. It was sleek, it was sexy, and when they started the engine, it purred like a dangerous cat. It was faster than a Ferrari, it was more comfortable than a Ferrari, and most importantly, the clutch didn't break. The press went wild. The rich customers who were tired of Enzo's rudeness flocked to Lamborghini. Ferruccio had done the impossible. He turned a personal insult into a global empire. And poor Enzo, he never publicly admitted he was wrong, but he had to watch as this tractor driver stole his customers and challenged his dominance on every road in Europe. Every time a yellow Lamborghini zoomed past a red Ferrari, it was a reminder of that day in the office. Ferruccio eventually named one of his most famous cars the Miura, named after a fighting bull. Why a bull? Because Ferruccio was a Taurus. But also, think about it. What is the Ferrari logo? A horse. What kills a horse in nature? Nothing, really. But what is stronger, heavier, and angrier than a horse? A bull. So the next time you see a Lamborghini on the street, don't just look at the price tag. Look at the emblem. That angry bull on the front isn't just a logo. It represents the rage of a man who was told he wasn't good enough. It is a multi-million-dollar middle finger to Enzo Ferrari. And honestly, that is the kind of pettiness I can respect. Okay, let's move from Italian roads to American living rooms. This next story is about the biggest mistake in corporate history. It is a story that makes every CEO wake up in a cold sweat at night. It is the story of how a tiny company begged a giant to buy them, got laughed out of the room, and then proceeded to destroy that giant completely. I am talking, of course, about Netflix versus Blockbuster. If you are too young to remember Blockbuster, let me paint a picture for you. In the 90s and early 2000s, Blockbuster was king. It was a Friday night ritual. You would drive to the store. The smell of popcorn and old carpet would hit you. You would walk the aisles, fighting with your siblings over which movie to rent. And if you were late returning a tape, you paid a fine. Those late fees were annoying. Everybody hated them. But Blockbuster loved them. In fact, they made nearly $800 million a year just from late fees. It was free money. Enter a guy named Reed Hastings. One day in 1997, Reed rented the movie Apollo 13. He lost track of time. When he returned it, he was 6 weeks late. The clerk at Blockbuster smiled and said, "That will be $40, sir. $40. That was more than the cost of buying the movie. Reed was embarrassed. He didn't want to tell his wife he wasted $40 on a rental. On his drive to the gym, he started thinking. He thought, gym memberships are better. You pay a flat fee, and you exercise as much as you want. Why aren't movies like that? That anger, that $40 fine, birthed Netflix. But the early Netflix wasn't streaming. It was DVDs by mail. You went online, made a list, and they mailed you the movie. No late fees. Keep it as long as you want. It was a great idea. But it was expensive to run. The shipping costs were killing them. By the year 2000, Netflix was bleeding money. They were on the verge of bankruptcy. Reed Hastings and his partner decided to give up. They said, let's just sell the company to the big guys. So they flew to Dallas, Texas, the headquarters of Blockbuster. Picture this. The Netflix guys are nervous. They are wearing bad suits. They are nobody. They walk into a massive glass skyscraper. They are led into a giant boardroom with a view of the city. The CEO of Blockbuster, John Antioco, walks in. He's wearing a $2,000 suit. He looks like a guy who owns the world. Because he did. Blockbuster had 9,000 stores globally. Netflix had a website that barely worked. The meeting begins. Reed Hastings makes his pitch. He says, "Look, the future is online. We will run your online brand. You run the stores. We will join forces." The Blockbuster CEO leans back and asks the magic question. "How much? How much do you want for your little company?" Reed takes a deep breath and says, $50 million. Silence. Then, laughter. The Blockbuster executives tried to hold it in, but they couldn't. One of them literally covered his mouth to stop giggling. They looked at Reed like he was a comedian telling a joke. The CEO basically said, "Get out of my office. The dot-com hysteria is over. People want to browse stores. They like the smell of popcorn. No one wants to order movies online." Reed and his partner left that room humiliated. They flew back to California in silence. The shame of that laughter burned in their ears. It was the lowest point of their lives. But on that plane ride home, something changed. They looked at each other and realized, we have to kill them. We have no choice. If they won't buy us, we have to beat them. It seemed impossible. It was David versus Goliath. But Blockbuster had a weakness. They were addicted to those late fees. They couldn't get rid of them because their investors loved the money. Netflix didn't have late fees. Slowly, people started switching. Why pay for a late movie when Netflix lets you keep it forever? Then, technology changed. Internet got faster. Netflix realized before anyone else that DVDs were going to die. They invested everything into streaming. Blockbuster ignored it. They said, streaming is low quality. People want the physical disc. They refused to change. By the time Blockbuster realized their mistake, it was too late. The ship had already hit the iceberg. In 2010, just 10 years after laughing at Netflix, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy, from 9,000 stores to 0. And Netflix? The company they could have bought for $50 million? Today, it is worth over $200 billion. There is a tragic irony here. Today, there is exactly one Blockbuster store left in the world. It's in Bend, Oregon. It's a tourist attraction. And guess what? There is a documentary about that last Blockbuster store. And where can you watch that documentary? On Netflix. Talk about the ultimate revenge. Netflix didn't just kill them. They are now streaming the funeral. So the lesson here is simple. If a small, nerdy guy comes into your office with a crazy idea, don't laugh at him. Because 10 years later, he might be the one buying your furniture at the bankruptcy auction. All right, let's get personal. We talked about business rivals, but what happens when the rival is your own flesh and blood? This next story is about the most famous sibling rivalry in history. It is the story of two German brothers who hated each other so much they literally split their hometown in half. I am talking about Adolf and Rudolf Dassler, the founders of Adidas and Puma. Let's go back to the 1920s. A small town in Germany called Herzogenaurach. Try saying that 3 times fast. In this town, in their mother's laundry room, 2 brothers started making sports shoes. Adolf, who everyone called Adi, was the craftsman. He was the quiet genius who designed the shoes. Rudolf, the older brother, was the salesman. He was loud, charismatic, and could sell ice to an Eskimo. Together, they were unstoppable. They formed the Gebrüder Dassler factory. They were doing okay. But their big break came in 1936, the Berlin Olympics. This part is actually crazy. It's Nazi Germany. The atmosphere is terrifying. But Adi Dassler has a bold idea. He takes a suitcase full of his spiked shoes, sneaks into the Olympic Village, and convinces an American sprinter to wear them. That sprinter was Jesse Owens. Jesse Owens goes out wearing Dassler shoes and wins 4 gold medals right in front of Hitler. It was a legendary moment. And overnight, the Dassler brothers became famous. Everyone wanted their shoes. But success is poison if you have an ego. Tension started building between the brothers. They were very different men. Their wives hated each other. They lived in the same big house, and they fought constantly. Then came World War II. Things got dark. The factory was forced to make weapons. Both brothers were called to duty. There's a rumor, a specific story that explains the breakup. During an Allied bombing raid, Adi and his wife climbed into a bomb shelter where Rudolf and his wife were already hiding. Adi said, quote, "The dirty bastards are back again." He was talking about the Allied planes. But Rudolph? He was paranoid. He thought Adi was talking about him and his family. He never forgave him for that sentence. After the war, the hatred was uncontrollable. They couldn't breathe the same air. So in 1948, they made a decision. They split the company. Adi took his name, Adi, and the first letters of his last name, Das. Adidas. Rudolph tried to do the same. He called his company Ruda, which sounds terrible. Luckily, he changed it to Puma. But here is where it gets wild. They didn't just split the company, they split the town. Adidas built its factory on one side of the river. Puma built its factory on the other side. The town of Herzogenaurach became known as, quote, the town of bent necks. Why? Because before talking to someone, people would look down at their shoes to see whose side they were on. If you worked for Adidas, you didn't drink beer with Puma workers. You didn't marry Puma workers. It was like a gang war, but with sneakers. Local businesses picked sides. Some butchers would only serve Adidas people. Some bakers would only serve Puma people. The rivalry pushed them to innovate. They fought over everything. Who would sponsor Pele? Who would sponsor Muhammad Ali? They threw money at athletes just to spite the other brother. But the sad part? They never reconciled. When they died, they were buried in the same cemetery, but at opposite ends, as far away from each other as possible. Even in death, they kept their distance. So today, when you choose between those three stripes or that jumping cat, you aren't just picking a shoe. You are picking a side in a 70-year-old family feud. It is petty. It is sad. But hey, it gave us some really great shoes. Okay, next stop, fast food. When you think of McDonald's, what do you see? The Golden Arches? The Big Mac? Or maybe a creepy clown named Ronald? But do you know who founded it? Most people would say Ray Kroc, because that is what the history books say. But that is a lie. Ray Kroc didn't found McDonald's. He stole it. Well, he bought it. But he bought it in a way that feels like theft. Let's go to California in 1954. The real founders are two brothers, Mac and Dick McDonald. These guys were geniuses. They invented the speedy service system. Before them, drive-in restaurants were slow. You waited 30 minutes for cold food. The McDonald brothers treated the kitchen like a factory. One person grills the burger. One person puts on the pickles. One person wraps it. Boom, burger in 30 seconds. It was revolutionary. Enter Ray Kroc. Ray was not a genius. He was a 52-year-old failing salesman. He was selling milkshake mixers. He was tired, broke, and desperate. He gets an order from this small burger stand in San Bernardino. They ordered 8 mixers. Ray thinks, what kind of burger stand needs to make 40 milkshakes at once? He drives out to see it, and he is blown away. The lines are huge. The food is cheap. The operation is perfect. He sees dollar signs. He tells the brothers, franchise this, open stores everywhere. But Mac and Dick, they were happy. They were making enough money. They didn't want the headache of a big corporation. They were perfectionists. They were afraid that if they got too big, the quality would drop. Ray convinces them. He says, let me do it. I will do the work. You just sit there and collect checks. They sign a contract. It was a very strict contract. Ray couldn't change anything without the brothers' permission. Not even the temperature of the fries. Ray expands like crazy. He opens hundreds of stores, but he isn't making money. His cut is too small. He is drowning in debt. And the brothers? They are sitting in their mansion, refusing to renegotiate. They refuse to let him raise prices. They refuse to let him change the menu. Ray is furious. He realizes that as long as the brothers own the name, he is just an employee. So he decides to eat them alive. Ray finds a loophole. He realizes the real money isn't in the burgers. It's in the real estate. He starts buying the land under the new McDonald's restaurants. Now he is the landlord. The franchise owners pay him rent. He suddenly has all the power. He goes back to the brothers with a suitcase of money. He offers to buy them out completely. He asks, how much? The brothers say, $2.7 million. That was a huge amount of money back then. Ray borrows cash from every bank he can find, and he pays them. But here is the twist. The brothers wanted to keep their original store in San Bernardino, the one where it all started. They wanted to give it to their loyal employees. Ray said, fine, keep the original store, but you can't call it McDonald's anymore. I own the name. The brothers renamed their store the Big M. Ray was so petty, so angry, that he opened a brand new McDonald's, exactly 1 block away from the Big M. He used his new corporate power to lower prices. He ran ads destroying them. Within a few years, the original brothers went out of business. Ray Kroc erased them. He even started printing business cards that said Ray Kroc, founder. He wrote the brothers out of history. It is a brutal story. It shows that in business, being the first isn't enough. Being the smartest isn't enough. Sometimes, you have to be the shark. So, enjoy your Happy Meal. Just remember the 2 brothers who designed the kitchen, invented the fries, and then got eaten by the wolf they invited in. All right, let's lighten the mood a bit. We talked about revenge and betrayal. Now let's talk about pure, unadulterated panic. I want to take you to 1985, the year of neon clothes, bad hair, and the biggest marketing disaster in human history. I am talking about New Coke. The players are Coca-Cola and Pepsi. For 100 years, Coke was the king. But in the 80s, Pepsi started doing something brilliant. The Pepsi Challenge. You remember the ads? They would blindfold people in malls. They would give them 2 cups, 1 Coke, 1 Pepsi. Take a sip. Which one do you like? And the horror. Most people picked Pepsi. Why? Because Pepsi is slightly sweeter. In a single sip, your brain prefers sugar. Coke executives were sweating. They were losing market share. They were terrified that the younger generation thought Coke was an old person drink. So they did the unthinkable. They decided to change the secret formula, the holy grail of soft drinks. They spent millions in labs. They created a new flavor. It was sweeter. It tasted more like, well, like Pepsi. They called it New Coke. They were so confident they stopped making the old Coke. They poured it down the drain. They launched New Coke with fireworks and celebrities. They expected applause. Instead, they got a revolution. America lost its mind. And not in a good way. People were furious. It wasn't just a drink. It was part of their childhood. Coke's headquarters in Atlanta received 400,000 angry phone calls. People were protesting in the streets. I am not joking. Literal signs saying, "Bring back our Coke." There was a guy in Seattle who formed an organization called Old Cola Drinkers of America. He sued the company. Fidel Castro, the dictator of Cuba, hated America, but even he complained that the new Coke tasted like garbage. Coke executives were in shock. They thought, but in blind tests, you liked it more. They forgot one thing: psychology. People didn't drink Coke just for the taste, they drank it for the memories. For the feeling. By taking it away, Coke broke a sentimental bond. The panic at Coke HQ was legendary. They had warehouses full of this new soda that nobody wanted. Pepsi was laughing at them. Pepsi even ran ads saying, "Look, even Coke knows Pepsi tastes better. That's why they changed their formula." After 79 days of chaos, Coke surrendered. They went on TV. The CEO looked like he had been crying. He said, "We hear you." They announced the return of Coca-Cola Classic. And then something magical happened. Sales exploded. People were so happy to have their old Coke back, they bought more of it than ever before. Coke's stock price went to the moon. They crushed Pepsi. Now, conspiracy theorists will tell you, this was a plan! They did it on purpose to create hype. But trust me, it wasn't a plan. Big companies are not that smart. It was a mistake. A massive, expensive mistake. But it proved one thing. You don't mess with nostalgia. You can change the bottle, you can change the logo, but never, ever mess with the sugar water that people grew up with. You know, we take our computers and phones for granted today. You tap a glass screen, and the world appears. But there was a time, not too long ago, when using a computer meant you had to be a rocket scientist. It was a world of blinking green cursors, black screens, and confusing commands. And in that gray, boring world, 2 young men appeared. They couldn't have been more different. One was a hippie who walked barefoot, didn't shower enough, and believed in the spiritual power of fruit. The other was the ultimate nerd, a guy who memorized code for fun, wore glasses bigger than his face, and thought business was the most exciting game on earth. I am talking, of course, about Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, the founders of Apple and Microsoft. Their rivalry isn't just a business story, it is a Shakespearean tragedy. It has friendship, it has betrayal, it has a public execution, and finally a resurrection. Let's rewind the tape to the mid-1970s. California. Imagine a garage. It smells like solder, old dust, and ambition. This is where Steve Jobs and his genius friend Steve Wozniak are building the first Apple computer. They aren't trying to get rich. Well, Jobs is. But Wozniak just wants to impress his friends at the Homebrew Computer Club. Now, at the exact same time, up in Seattle, a young Bill Gates is dropping out of Harvard. Why? Because he saw a magazine cover. A magazine showing a kit computer called the Altair. Gates realized something before anyone else. He realized that the hardware, the metal box, didn't matter. What mattered was the brain inside the box, the software. So you have these two forces rising. Apple is the cool kid. They want to make computers friendly. They want a computer that you can put in your kitchen. Microsoft is the smart kid. They want to put their software inside every computer on the planet. They don't care who makes the box. In the early days, believe it or not, they were partners. Yes, friends, in the early 80s, Apple was working on a secret project, the Macintosh. Jobs wanted the Macintosh to be perfect. He wanted it to be easy. He didn't want you to type code. He wanted you to use a mouse to click on icons. This sounds normal today. Back then, it was witchcraft. No one had seen a mouse before. Jobs needed software for this new magical machine. So who did he call? He called Bill Gates. He flew Bill Gates down to Cupertino. He showed him the prototype. Jobs was arrogant. He looked at Gates and basically said, "Look at this masterpiece. We are changing the world. I want you to write software for it. But don't get any ideas. This is our magic." Bill Gates looked at the Macintosh. He saw the graphical interface, the windows, the mouse. And he didn't just see a cool product. He saw the future of computing. He smiled, signed the contract, and said, "Sure, Steve, we will write software for you." But inside Bill's head, the gears were turning. He was thinking, this is it. This graphical thing? Everyone needs this. Now, here is the spicy part, the theft. Steve Jobs didn't actually invent the mouse or the windows. He saw them at a research center called Xerox PARC. Xerox was a copier company. They had these geniuses working in a lab inventing the future, but the Xerox bosses were too stupid to understand it. Jobs walked into Xerox, saw the mouse, and said, "You are sitting on a gold mine." He took the idea and polished it into the Macintosh. So when Bill Gates started working on the Macintosh project, he had access to Apple's secrets. He saw how the operating system worked. Fast forward to 1983. Steve Jobs is getting ready to launch the Macintosh. He is building hype. He hires Ridley Scott, the director of Alien, to make the famous 1984 commercial. You know the one. The woman throws a hammer at the screen. It was art. But while Jobs was being an artist, Bill Gates was being a businessman. Behind Jobs' back, quietly, in a dark room in Seattle, Microsoft was building something called Windows. November 1983. Steve Jobs hears a rumor. He hears that Microsoft is making an operating system that looks exactly like the Macintosh. He goes nuclear. He summons Bill Gates to Apple headquarters. Imagine the scene. A conference room. Steve Jobs is screaming. His face is red. He is surrounded by his lieutenants. Bill Gates is sitting there, calm, rocking back and forth in his chair like he always does. Jobs yells, "You are ripping us off. I trusted you, and you are stealing from us." And then Bill Gates delivers the coldest line in tech history. He looks at Steve and says, "Well, Steve, I think there's more than one way of looking at it. I think it's more like we both had this rich neighbor named Xerox, and I broke into his house to steal the TV set, only to find that you had already stolen it." Boom. Mic drop. Gates was saying, "You didn't invent this either, Steve. You stole it from Xerox. I just stole it from you." Despite the screaming, Microsoft released Windows 1.0. It was ugly. It was slow. It was terrible compared to the Mac. But it had one advantage. It was cheap. And it ran on any computer, not just Apple computers. This was the beginning of the war. Apple was the luxury car. Beautiful, expensive, closed. Microsoft was the engine manufacturer. They put their engine in Fords, Toyotas, Hondas, everything. And in business, volume wins. By 1985, tension at Apple was breaking point. But not just with Microsoft. Inside Apple, Steve Jobs was becoming impossible to work with. He was a perfectionist. He would scream at engineers if the chips inside the computer didn't look beautiful. Who cares what the chips look like? No one sees them. But Steve cared. The board of directors got tired of him. They hired a CEO named John Sculley. Ideally, Sculley was supposed to be the adult in the room, but Jobs and Sculley clashed. It was a power struggle, and in 1985, the unthinkable happened. The board voted. They chose Sculley over Jobs. Steve Jobs, the man who founded the company in his garage, the visionary, was fired from his own company. Can you imagine the humiliation? He was 30 years old. He was world famous. And he was kicked out on the street. He went home, devastated. He sold all his Apple shares. He decided to start a new company called Next. Meanwhile, Bill Gates was probably watching this from Seattle, thinking, the only rival who could stop me is gone. With Steve Jobs gone, Apple lost its soul. For the next 10 years, Apple wandered in the desert. They started making terrible products, confusing cameras, boring computers that looked like gray boxes. They tried to be like Microsoft, but they weren't good at it. Meanwhile, Microsoft became the empire. Windows 95 launched. Do you remember Windows 95? It was a global event. The Rolling Stones song Start Me Up was playing everywhere. People lined up at midnight to buy software. A CD in a box! Bill Gates became the richest man in the world. He was everywhere. He was the king. Microsoft crushed everyone. They crushed Netscape. They crushed WordPerfect. If you used a computer in the 90s, you used Windows. It was inescapable. By 1996, Apple was on its deathbed. I am not exaggerating. They had enough cash to survive for maybe 90 days. The stock price was garbage. The press was writing obituaries. Apple is dead. Who should buy Apple? They needed a miracle. They needed a new operating system because their old one was falling apart. So the desperate Apple executives looked around. They saw this small niche company called NXT, the company founded by Steve Jobs. In a twist of fate that no writer could invent, Apple bought Next. Why? Not for the computers, but to get the software and to get the man. Steve Jobs came back, but he came back as a consultant. He walked into the Apple boardroom wearing his black turtleneck and jeans, and he looked at the mess. He saw 50 different products. Printers, scanners, Newtons. He grabbed a marker. He went to the whiteboard. He drew a simple grid, 2 columns, consumer and pro, 2 rows, desktop and portable. He crossed out everything else. He said, we are killing 70% of these products. We are going to focus. We are going to make 4 great computers. That's it. The board was terrified. But Steve, we will lose money. Steve didn't care. He knew that to survive, Apple had to be special again. But there was one big problem. Money. Apple was broke. They needed cash to build these new computers. Banks wouldn't lend to them. They were considered a dead company. Steve Jobs had to swallow his pride. He had to make the hardest phone call of his life. He picked up the phone and called his arch-nemesis. He called Bill Gates. Macworld Expo in Boston. The crowd is full of Apple faithfuls. They hate Microsoft. To them, Microsoft is the devil. Steve Jobs walks on stage. He looks humble. He says, we have to let go of this notion that for Apple to win, Microsoft has to lose. The crowd is confused. What is he talking about? Then, behind Steve, on a massive cinema screen, a video feed turns on. It's the giant face of Bill Gates. He is looking down at the crowd like Big Brother. The audience boos. They actually booed the richest man on earth. But Steve Jobs stood there and took the heat. Bill Gates announced that Microsoft would invest $150 million in Apple. He saved his rival. Why? Why did Bill Gates save the company that wanted to destroy him? Some say it was out of pity. Some say it was because Microsoft was being investigated for being a monopoly, and they needed Apple to stay alive so they could say, look, we have competition. Whatever the reason, that $150 million was the fuel Steve Jobs needed. With that money, Jobs built the iMac, the colorful, translucent computer that looked like candy. It was a hit. Then he built the iPod. Suddenly, Apple wasn't just a computer company, it was a music company. Then in 2007, he dropped the nuclear bomb, the iPhone. The iPhone changed everything. Microsoft at the time was run by Steve Ballmer. When the iPhone came out, Ballmer laughed at it. He said, $500 for a phone with no keyboard? Business people will never buy it. That laughter was the sound of the old empire dying. The world shifted from PCs to mobile. And in the mobile world, Apple was king. Microsoft was nowhere. Steve Jobs passed away in 2011, but he died knowing that he had won the long game. When he died, Apple was the most valuable company in the world, surpassing Microsoft. The hippies had finally beaten the nerds. But the story doesn't end there. Today, both companies are giants. They don't fight as much anymore. They have different kingdoms. Microsoft owns the cloud and business. Apple owns your pocket and your lifestyle. But that 30-year war, from the garage to the iPhone, it shaped the entire modern world. Every time you swipe a screen, remember Steve Jobs' obsession with perfection. Every time you open a spreadsheet at work, remember Bill Gates' obsession with dominance. Two men, two visions, one world. And to think, it all started with a stolen idea from a Xerox photocopier company. Life really is stranger than fiction. Okay, let's talk about the most famous face in fast food. You know him. The old man with the white suit, the black string tie, and the glasses. He is on millions of buckets of chicken every single day. We think of him as a cute, harmless grandpa. But let me tell you, Harlan Sanders was not a cute grandpa. He was a tough, gun-toting, swearing, hard-working hustler who failed at almost everything he tried until he was an old man. The story of KFC doesn't start in a boardroom. It starts with a lot of bad luck. Sanders dropped out of school in the 6th grade. By the time he was 40, he had lost more jobs than most people have in a lifetime. He worked as a steamboat pilot, fired, he worked on the railroad, fired for fighting. He became a lawyer. Yes, a lawyer. But he ruined that career because he got into a fistfight with his own client in the middle of a courtroom. The guy had a temper. In the 1930s, he finally found something he was okay at. He ran a gas station in Corbin, Kentucky. It was a dusty, lonely place, but Sanders was smart. He realized that hungry travelers were stopping for gas, so he dragged his own dining table into the station and started cooking for them. Steaks, ham, and of course, fried chicken. The food was good. People started stopping just for the food, not the gas. He called it Sanders Court and Cafe. But business is war, and Sanders had a rival down the road. There was another gas station owner named Matt Stewart. Matt hated Sanders. He was jealous of the traffic Sanders was getting. So Matt started painting over Sanders' advertising signs. Sanders went out and repainted them. Matt painted over them again. This escalated. One day, Sanders hears that Matt is out there painting over his sign again. Sanders doesn't call the police. No. He grabs two guys, grabs a gun, and goes down to confront him. It turns into a shootout. Literally. Matt Stewart pulls a gun and shoots one of Sanders' friends. The friend dies. Sanders grabs the gun and shoots Matt Stewart in the shoulder. The police come. Matt goes to prison for murder. Sanders gets off on self-defense. With his rival in jail, Sanders finally had no competition. His restaurant boomed. The governor of Kentucky was so impressed by his food that he gave him the honorary title of Colonel. So he wasn't a military colonel, he was a chicken colonel. But life wasn't done testing him. Just when he was getting rich, disaster struck. The government built a new highway, Interstate 75. This new highway bypassed his restaurant completely. Overnight, the traffic stopped. No one came to eat. Sanders tried to survive, but he couldn't. He had to sell his restaurant at an auction. After paying his debts, he was left with nothing. Imagine this. He is 65 years old. He is broke. He is living on a Social Security check of $105 a month. Most people would just give up and retire. But Sanders? He looked at his pressure cooker, he looked at his blend of 11 herbs and spices, and he said, I am going to sell this chicken to the world. Mega Script, The Crazy Life of Colonel Sanders, the KFC Story. Part 2, The Empire and the Regret. TTS, Punctuation Hacked. So, at age 65, Harlan Sanders becomes a startup founder. But he didn't have money to open restaurants. So he invented a new model. Franchising. His plan was crazy. He would drive to other restaurants, cook his chicken for the owners, and if they liked it, they would pay him a nickel, 5 cents, for every chicken they sold. He loaded up his car with pressure cookers and bags of flour. He slept in the back of his car. He shaved in gas station bathrooms. He ate his own fried chicken to save money. He went door to door. He was rejected 1,009 times. Can you imagine? 1,009 people said no to his face. "Get out of here, old man. Your chicken is weird. Why do you use a pressure cooker?" But he didn't stop. Finally, he convinced a guy in Utah named Pete Harmon. They shook hands. Pete started selling the Kentucky Fried Chicken, and it exploded. Sales tripled. It was a sensation. By 1964, just 10 years later, the Colonel had 600 franchises. He was an icon. He wore the white suit everywhere so he couldn't get it dirty. It forced him to be clean. But the business got too big for an old man to handle. Investors came circling. They offered him $2 million to sell the company. Sanders was 74. He was tired. He took the deal. He sold KFC. Now, this is where the story usually ends. Happy ending, right? Wrong. The Colonel hated the new owners. He hated what they did to his food. The new owners wanted to cut costs. They changed the recipe. They changed the gravy. Sanders was furious. He would visit KFC restaurants, taste the gravy, and scream at the employees. He told a newspaper reporter, "My God, that gravy is wallpaper paste, and the chicken is sludge." He even sued the company he founded. He tried to open a competitor restaurant called the Colonel's Lady. KFC sued him back. It was a mess. The face of the company was at war with the company itself. Eventually, they settled. Sanders agreed to stop complaining, mostly, and he remained the brand ambassador until he died at age 90. But up until his last days, he was a perfectionist. He never cared about the money as much as he cared about the quality of that fried chicken. So KFC isn't just a corporate giant. It is the legacy of a man who failed at being a lawyer, failed at being a steamboat pilot, got into a gunfight, went broke at 65, and then decided to conquer the world from the trunk of his car. It is proof that it is never, ever too late to start your own business. Have you ever stepped on a Lego brick in the middle of the night? It is the worst pain known to humanity. It feels like stepping on a landmine. But let me tell you something. The pain of stepping on a Lego is nothing compared to the pain of building the company itself. Most people look at Lego and see a cute, colorful toy company from Denmark. But the true story of Lego is a tragedy. It is a story of fire, death, bankruptcy, and a stubborn carpenter who simply refused to give up. Let's go back to 1916. Billund, Denmark. It's a tiny, quiet village. Our hero is a man named Ole Kirk Christensen. Ole was a master carpenter. He built houses. He built furniture. He was a simple, hard-working man with a wife and 4 sons. But life decided to test Ole. In 1924, his 2 young sons were playing in the workshop. They accidentally set fire to some wood shavings. The fire spread fast. Within an hour, the entire workshop and the family home burned to the ground. Everything he owned, gone. Most people would be devastated. Ole? He saw it as a sign to build something bigger. He rebuilt the workshop. He started making high-quality ladders and ironing boards. But then, 1929, the Great Depression hits. Suddenly, nobody in Denmark had money to build houses or buy furniture. Ole had no customers. He had to fire all his assistants. And then, the ultimate tragedy. In 1932, his wife died. Ole was left alone, with 4 hungry boys to raise. No money, no wife, a business that was failing. It was the lowest point of his life. To save wood, and because he couldn't afford to build big things, Ole started making small things, miniature ladders, miniature ironing boards. And then, toys, wooden ducks, wooden cars, yo-yos. His family told him he was crazy. Toys? Seriously? You are a master carpenter. Don't waste your time on toys. But Ole noticed something. Even when people are poor, even when they can't buy food, they will always find a way to buy a toy for their child. He decided to bet everything on toys. He needed a name. He held a contest among his employees. The prize was a bottle of homemade wine. In the end, he chose the name himself. He took the Danish words "leg godt," which means play well. He combined them. Lego. He didn't know it at the time, but in Latin, Lego also means I put together. It was destiny. But the universe wasn't done testing him. 1942. World War II. The Nazis are occupying Denmark. One night, a fire broke out in the Lego factory. We still don't know exactly how it started, but the result was the same. Everything burned down. Again. For the second time in his life, Ole stood in the ashes of his dream. He was older now. He was tired. He almost quit. But his responsibility to his sons and his employees kept him going. He rebuilt, again. After the war, Ole did something risky. He went to a technology fair in Copenhagen. He saw a new machine, a plastic injection molding machine. It was expensive. It cost twice as much as the profit of the entire previous year. Everyone said, "Plastic? Plastic is cheap. Plastic breaks. Stick to wood, Ole." Ole ignored them. He bought the machine. He started making little plastic bricks. They were called automatic binding bricks. But there was a problem. The bricks were hollow. They didn't stick together well. You could stack them, but if you touched them, they would fall over. It was frustrating. Customers hated them. They sent letters saying, quote, "Plastic toys will never replace good wooden toys." Ole died in 1958. He never saw the global success of his company. His son, Gottfried, took over. Gottfried was the one who solved the problem. He sat down and thought, how do we make them stick? He realized that if he put little tubes inside the hollow brick, they would grip the studs on top. Clutch power. That was the magic. With this new design, you could build anything. A castle, a spaceship, a city, and you could pick it up, and it wouldn't break. They patented it in 1958, and suddenly, Lego exploded. It conquered Europe, then America. It became the toy of the century. Fast forward to the 1990s. Lego is a giant, but giants get arrogant. The patent for the brick expired. Now, any Chinese company could make cheap fake Legos. Lego panicked. They thought, the brick is dead. Kids want video games. Kids want cool stuff. So Lego stopped focusing on the brick. They started making clothes, watches, video games, theme parks. They launched a line called Galador, ugly action figures that didn't even look like Lego. They launched Jackstone, figures that came pre-built so kids didn't have to build anything. Can you imagine? Lego taking away the building part? It was a disaster. By 2003, Lego was bleeding money. They were losing $1 million a day. They were $800 million in debt. The world's biggest toy company was about to go bankrupt. Rumors were flying that Mattel or Hasbro would buy them for pennies. Then, a young man named Jørgen Vig Knudstorp walked in. He wasn't a toy maker, he was a consultant. He wore glasses and looked like a Harry Potter character. He went into the boardroom and told the old executives the hard truth. He said, "We are arrogant. We don't know who we are anymore. We are trying to be a lifestyle brand, but we are just a brick company." He famously said, "We are building a burning platform." The board fired the old CEO and put Jørgen in charge. He did something radical. He sold the theme parks. He fired the clothing designers. He canceled the weird action figures. He adopted a new motto, back to the brick. He told the designers, stop inventing new pieces. Use the standard bricks. Be creative with less. He reduced the number of different parts from 13,000 down to 6,000. And then, they listened to the fans. For years, Lego ignored the adults, the AFOLs, adult fans of Lego. They thought adults playing with toys was weird. Jørgen embraced them. He realized that these adults were the ones buying the huge, expensive sets like the Star Wars Millennium Falcon. He partnered with Star Wars, with Harry Potter, with Batman. But unlike before, he made sure that the experience was still about building. The turnaround was legendary. In 10 years, Lego quadrupled its revenue. They released the Lego Movie. It was basically a 90-minute commercial, but it was so good, nobody cared. It celebrated the joy of creativity, the Kregel, the master builders. It reminded the world why they loved those plastic bricks. Today, Lego is the #1 toy company in the world. Bigger than Mattel, bigger than Hasbro. They produce 75 billion bricks a year. That is enough for every person on Earth to have 10 bricks. And they are still privately owned by the Christensen family. Ole's great-grandson is now representing the family. So the story of Lego is not just about toys. It is about resilience. It's about a man who lost his home, his workshop, his wife, and nearly his mind, but kept building. And it's about a company that lost its way, tried to be cool, failed, and realized that being boring and simple was actually the coolest thing in the world. Sometimes in life, when everything is falling apart, you just have to pick up the pieces and put them back together, brick by brick.